Hello again, folks. It's Jeff Adler here with the continuing video of to follow up my book, Why I'm Right, which you can see right here on my shelf here. This is 2.0, which is to expand on all these ideas that I had in the book and some more ideas based on my conservative political philosophy. This time around, we're on chapter 6 and want to talk a little bit more about rights versus privileges. Uh, this being because so many people I know on Facebook and that I see elsewhere in the news confuse these two concepts all the time. Rights versus privileges it's confusing to some people because they have been brought up, they have been taught, they have been told that anything they want under the sun is their right to have. In this entitlement culture that we live in today, uh, kids from a very young age are indoctrinated into an idea that somehow just wanting a thing means they deserve a thing or should ultimately receive a thing. And of course, the left teaches everybody that its attempts through its philosophy that they're trying to make sure that everybody arrives at the finish line at the same time. Um, and it's in direct opposition to the ideas that conservatives proffer, and that is that everyone's at the starting line at the same time. What happens after that is basically up to the individual. Throughout history, as I mentioned in a previous video, governments have been the enemy of freedom. They've been all, for the most part, completely all left-wing, whether they were theocratic, like the Egyptians, or the current state of Iran, or they were monarchs, like England, old Russia, monarchies. They were fiefdoms, Middle Ages. They were, communist or socialist in the 20th century, or even a fascist, another left-wing ideology that is statist, totalitarian, top-down kind of governing. And all these types of governments in the past have one thing in common, and that is they obliterate the rights of the individual in favor of the rights of the collective, of the state, of the group, of the society, of everybody as a whole. And you cannot have both. You are either going to respect the rights of the individual or you're going to respect the rights of the collective. You can't do both. There's no half measures because one destroys the other. Period. When the United States was formed, as I said in my video about America being special, they, for the first time in human history, undertook the idea that individual rights were sacrosanct. And not only did they create a government that understood it, they created a government that recognized it and protected it against all things collective, all things statist, and decided that was the best way to end the tyranny of history that had been going on since the dawn of civilization. However, the left anyway, seems to want to return to this silly notion, and have been for 50, 60 years, that somehow the state, the collective, the community, the society are all more important than the individual. And they seek to destroy individual freedoms one by one or in small nibs or big gulps. And they do it by precedents. They do it through the court system. They do it through the slippery slope of the culture that they have basically taken over lock, stock, and barrel since the 60s. And they do it by indoctrination. Now, for the most part, it can be said that the difference between rights and privileges, there's some fairly easy determinators to tell them apart. And they're also misdiagnosed, or they're conflated as to being often the same thing, but they're very simple. Very, very simple. Rights are inherent in all people. You are born with rights, individual rights. Call them political rights if you want to. Natural rights if you want to. You can say they were from the Creator, as is in the Declaration of Independence, or you can say they're from nature, or nature's God, or however you want to say it. Versus privileges, which are conveyed, which are provided by the government. Those are government rights, if you will, privileges. Having individual rights, having real, actual rights, costs nobody a dime. They come at no expense to you, and they come at no expense to anybody else. However, privileges in the name of rights, so-called rights, that come from a government are at the expense, well, at whose expense are they? They're always somebody's paying for it. The minute the government says that the work that you produce must be, given to somebody else, you just did something at your expense for somebody else's to take. Whether it's in the form of education or welfare or housing or health care, affirmative action, somebody has to give something up, whether it's time, labor, property, money, for somebody else to have that. That's an expense. That means it's not a right. In fact, it could be said that only capitalism really respects an individual's right. It's the only way to get it. But it could also be said that the minute a government tells you as an individual that you must do something for free or give something up, the expense part of handing it to so somebody else can have something that they didn't work for, you are no longer free. You are a slave. And that is diametrically opposed to the American way of life, American politics, the Constitution, what we as a country are all about. Every little or large time that the government makes a law, passes something that forces you to involuntarily do something that goes against your two basic rights, life and property, they are making you more and more a slave. And copying how it was done before the United States was created. For 150 years, they kind of had it right in this country. And then, as I mentioned, maybe the progressives a little bit, but certainly in the 20th century when we started growing government exponentially, we have dissolved, uh, almost completely eradicated the idea, or certainly trying hard, of individual rights. Um, Another difference that's easy to tell them apart, um, for those who seem to can't tell them apart, uh, be unable to, is a real right, natural right, political right, moral right, if you will, um, can't be given to you, and it can't be taken away because, again, you're born with it. However, the government can, because they're the ones providing the privilege, the so-called right, the amoral right, they can give it to you, and therefore they can take it from you. If it can be taken from you, guess what, folks? It ain't a right. Ayn Rand wrote an essay in 1963 about man's rights. It was one of the most brilliant things I ever read. She was amazing. In her books, Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, all these books, is full of true conservative thinking, true fundamental American values, originalist constitutional thinking as well. And she was is one of my heroes, to be honest with you. I think I would have loved to have known her personally myself. But in her essay in 63, which is amazing, the points that she talks about some 54 years ago are as relevant then as today as they were then, and maybe more so. But she had a quote in that essay that summarizes individual rights beautifully. And that is that individual rights are the means of subordinating society to moral law. Beautiful. Perfect. What does that mean? Up until the United States, as I mentioned, all the previous governments were all totalitarian style, statist style, collectivist style, altruistic / collectivist style, which are all diametrically opposed to the rights of individuals. They decided, as popes, potentates, kings, living gods, what have you, that they all knew best for you. You, as an individual, didn't have the brains, the equipment, the education, the knowledge to know how to live your own life. And they were going to tell you how to do it. Until the United States came around, they were amoral societies that subordinated individual rights for the society. And like I said, the liberals are trying to do that all over again, switching it right back to the way it worked. But it didn't work. Ever. Ancient Greece fell, ancient Egypt fell, ancient Rome fell. All these monarchies, all these totalitarian systems. Socialism is a hot mess. Communism killed 120 million people in the 20th century alone through gulags and genocide, wars. Throughout history, governments have been that thought this way were responsible for famine and plague and bloodshed and war and every bad thing that ever happened to humankind, far more than any criminal, collectively speaking, has done in our society. The criminals are pikers compared to the death and destruction that governments have wrought over the centuries. and the millennia. The United States sought to put an end to that. The framers of the Constitution, the founders of the country, sought to finally put a stake in the heart of tyranny. And through the conservative philosophers that they, as I mentioned before, that they followed, they did so. They put the individual first. And in the Declaration, Jefferson, and his genius shines through, recognizing for the first time in history that a man has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all of which is basically the right to life, to live it how you want. As long as it's not stepping on anyone else's rights, you're good to go. And the right to property. Something you make, something you build, something you earn, something you buy is yours to keep, to do with what you want, to dispose of how you want. And nobody can take that from you. And the government and the Constitution of the United States says exactly that. And that is the beauty of the United States government system. First time in history, we as individuals, not as a collective society, are recognized as the more important element, the thing that really makes it work. Through self-interest, as I mentioned before, the gears work. And as I also mentioned before, rights have limitations. All rights do. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution are basically things the government can't do. It's not so much what they're allowed to do, much to the lament of modern day liberals who hate the Constitution more and more because it stops them from doing the things they want to do, to mess with it. Even Obama was heard lamenting how the Constitution has got too many rules about what government cannot do. Well, that was the point, Mr. Constitutional Professor, Scholar, whatever you were. No duh. As I might have said this before, the old adage of your right to swing your fist ends at my face. People can misunderstand rights, even the ones they do have, and the ones that are in the Bill of Rights. You have the right to speak, but you don't have the right to be heard. You have the right to print a story, write a story, but you don't have the right to force someone to print it or read it. You have the right to assemble, but you don't have the right to cause a riot or do damage while you're peacefully assembling. Rights have limits, and the limits are when you step on somebody else's rights. And stepping on someone else's rights includes forcing somebody to give up their property, what they made, what they built, what they earned, and giving it to somebody or selling it to someone or handing it over to somebody who didn't earn it, who gave you nothing for it. Unless you volunteer that charity, your time, your effort, the thing you make, the thing you own, unless you voluntarily through charity give that away, your rights are being violated every time it's being forced from you without your consent or in the way that you wish it to be taken. This is absolutely fundamental Americanism. And no liberal can ever argue this point. They try. They'll muddy the waters. They'll make it all too complex, but it's very, very simple. Anything that is not right of life, right of property, and not born with. You are not born with. Anything that causes an expense, anything that can be given or taken, anything that is provided for you by a government or otherwise, anything that is not natural is not a right. Healthcare is not a right. Housing is not a right. Education is not a right. None of it. Welfare is not a right. Food stamps is not a right. I can go on and on and on, but you get the point. In the next videos, we'll be talking about each of the 10 amendments, first 10 amendments to the Constitution in more depth, so that the idea of the rights make more sense, and we can obliterate some more of the silly crap going on constantly about free speech and gun rights and all the rest of it. Until then, I encourage you to share the videos. They are on YouTube, they are on Facebook, and tell your friends and neighbors. Subscribe to my channel on YouTube if you would kindly do so, and we'll see you the next time. See you later.